Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for the second in a 7-part series as we linger in the Bardo with a couple of Lincolns. At least one, right? At least one Lincoln. We've got one Lincoln already. Though I am imagining we're going to get another one, and we're going to get into that discussion in a little bit. What we're going to do here is we're going to have a recap of what was read and then a discussion on the literary stuff going on therein. But first, I'm an idiot. You knew this. You knew this clicking on the video. This is the second of a 7-part series, and around the 900th video on the channel, you know by now I'm a moron. I should have started the last video with a very long throat clearing on how difficult George Saunders can be. Basically, what you have to do is care as little about punctuation as it seems the author himself does. So, when he leaves these sentences unended, completely vacuous in the way that they look on the page, you just have to take the words into the back of your mind. What he does a lot of times is that he will write in a sort of stream of consciousness, subconscious type of breath, if that makes any goddamn sense. But what you have to do, at least what works for me, and assuming insofar that it does work for me, is that you have to just kind of go with the flow. You have to accept that George Saunders knows what he's doing. And once you accept that George Saunders does know what he's doing, however difficult it is to believe that by the look of the page from time to time, once you're willing to accept that George Saunders does know what he's doing, and you're supposed to just go with the flow, a lot of the little things that make the story hard to read will disappear in your mind. They're still going to bug the hell out of you when you see them, but subconsciously, they will disappear. Much in the same. So what he's doing is he's putting subconsciousness on the page that taps into your subconsciousness. So all this prefrontal lobe stuff, all this stuff here is just gone. This is all gone. So his talk is subconscious. Your brain is in the subconscious. So you've got these things here going on with none of the middle. That's the easiest way I know how to explain it. Anyway, so where are we here? This is Lincoln in the Bardo, part 2 of a 7-part series, chapters 28 through 42. And our characters of the Nether Realm are besieged by apparently what they most wish to see, by what they want to have. They are attacked by siren-type characters from some other nether realm, ONR. Other realm? Nor? Are they from Nor? Anyway, these apparitions appear to be based most on the people that the people in our Bardo most wish to see and associate with. They are meant to lure them away, and they manage to do so, claiming 3 victims, as our characters would call them, including Mrs. Abigail Blass, who disappears in a fire sound and matter lightning blooming phenomenon. And as quickly as these siren calls come, the sirens themselves do leave. And Hans, Roger, and the Reverend take stock of their flock. And they settle on Abigail Blass, Mr. Coombs, and Willie being the departed. But soon they find out that they are mistaken, and Willie is still amongst them. They find young Willie looking quite distraught, and apparently he appears as if he has in fact lost half of his weight. half of the weight of a weightless being. I don't understand exactly how that works, but I'm imagining it's just an emaciated look is what they're going for, as if maybe mummified. And in this time, he starts arguing with the group. And in the time that they are interacting and Willie's arguing with them, vines have started sprouting up to grow around young Lincoln to trap him in the same way that they had trapped the trainer girl. The Bachelors then show up, and the best way to explain the Bachelors is to go ahead and let George Saunders do it. The Reverend Everly Thomas says, hats, laughter, crude jests, the sound of fart noises made by mouths from on high. These were the harbingers of the approach of the 3 Bachelors. Hans Volman tells us, though only they among us could fly, we did not envy them. And the Reverend Everly Thomas tells us, having never loved or been loved in that previous place, they were frozen here in a youthful state of perpetual emotional vacuity, interested only in freedom, profligacy, and hijinks, railing against any limitation or commitment whatsoever. Sounds like a bachelor, if I do say so myself. That is the best way to describe them, and they talk about Abe still being around. You mean the sad-looking fellow? What is the word that he used? I can't remember. It is around here someplace. He calls him sonorous, I think. Was it sonorous? I've lost it. I think he calls him sonorous. Hell of a word. One of the Bachelors refers to Abe Lincoln as sonorous and says, no, he's still around. We, on the other hand, have some hijinks to go pull, so we're going to go fuck off. And they do. Bevins and Volman then set out, just to see if Abe really is still around. Not that they're being nosy or anything. They're just setting out to have some fun. Along their journey, they find a newly minted member of the post-life gang, a fallen soldier of the Civil War. And he is in great unrest. Apparently, this is how you find yourself in the Bardo, correct? In his final days, he had cheated on his wife and lied to her about it. And in the throes of anguish here in the Bardo, he apologizes for that, both to his wife and to some type of an all-father, which we are generally left to assume is the Christian God. And boom, matter, lightning, blooming phenomenon, and fire sound, he's gone. And on 144, the way Volman and Bevins describe this is A, he surrendered, B, he had succumbed, and C, he capitulated. So that shows you a little bit of how it is that these characters feel about leaving to whatever that next step is. Is it really a type of graduation? We don't seem to think so. We think this is the place to be here in the Bardo. And the first thing I think is worth talking about here, the book really feels as if it is finding itself to me at this point. And I think what that means for me in my readership is that it is finding itself on a thematic level. The themes of what is going on here, these things are finally becoming prevalent. There is a quote from Neil Gaiman where he says that a second draft is to make it look like you knew what you were doing all along. Which, yeah, that's true. So even Stephen King in On Writing talks about the fact that you don't really want to sit down with a notepad of things that, hey, I want to write a novel that has a theme of love and a theme of perpetually making love to socks. I don't know. Whatever it is. You don't want the themes to be influencing the story as it comes out on the page. That's why a lot of the propaganda films that we're getting these days blow. So what you want to do is you want to write your story true to your story. And somewhere along the way, what your story is about is going to present itself to you. And a lot of times, for a lot of writers, what ends up happening is you finish your story, have no idea what the hell it's about. 3 weeks later, you're brushing your teeth and you almost jab yourself in the eye because what the story is really about presents itself to you. So, like Neil Gaiman says, your second draft is to make it look like you knew what you were doing all along. Say the theme of your story is that in The Walking Dead, it's not really the zombies that are the monsters. It's the other people. So say your Walking Dead project is a 300-page book, and right around page 250, you kind of see the fact that the real monsters are the other people. Then what you do is you keep going back into those other first 250 pages up here, and you sort of plant some seeds. You rewrite a couple scenes. You add a little bit of dialogue here and there that really lays the foundation for that. And I think we're feeling that at this point in the novel. And what do I mean by that? What are the themes? What's the main thrust? What's the big idea? What's the big picture here in the Bardo? I think it really makes itself clear here. Doing a lot of rhyming this video. It's not on purpose. It really makes itself clear here on page 111 when they're talking about the way that the Bardo sort of weighs on the younger inhabitants, on Miss Traynor, right? Miss Traynor is perpetually in pain now, having one hell of a time in the Bardo, and it's not really explained why. But here on 111, Bevins gives us, if Miss Traynor's case was any indication, this tendril would soon be followed by a succession of others until the boy was fully secured, Gulliver-like, to the roof. This is when the tendrils are coming after young Willie. Then Reverend Everly Thomas says, once secured, he would be rapidly overgrown by what would best be described as a placental sheen. Then we get it. This sheen then hardening into a shell-like carapace. That carapace would begin to transition through a series of others, viz. The fallen bridge, vulture, dog, terrible hag, etc., each more detailed and hideous than the last. This process only serving to increase the speed of his downward spiral. The more perverse the carapace, the less light, happiness, honesty, and positive aspirations he would get in. Volman then gives us driving him even further from the light. And then from the Reverend, these memories of Miss Traynor depressed us. And then move on from it. These are characters which are stuck, not just in the Bardo, but in some developmental phase. There is some reason they don't want to let go. And there is this way that we sort of stultify ourselves in life from time to time when we're not really able to transition from one section of life to another. How many of us know, or perhaps were, that person that graduated high school and didn't really have a college thing lined up? So there's a matter of years there sometimes where this sort of limbo, this sort of the Bardo ensues. And, what are you doing with your life? Well, I'm getting ready to go back to school. Are you working full-time? Well, not right now. I haven't picked anything up full-time right now. I'm working. I've got a job, but it's not a career. There's no real forward progress to it. And these are places that people get stuck. This is a way that we sort of lose control over our own progress. And oftentimes it's because not just are we stuck in life, we're stuck in transit almost. I knew a guy who lived at home with his mom for a very long time. And he had never really been socially outgoing, but the longer he lived at home, post high school, post a lot of people going off to college, post a lot of people getting a career, post a lot of people doing this or doing that, the longer he stayed there, the angrier he got at the world. The more it was everyone else's fault on things. He was vulnerable in that place. He was vulnerable. He knew he was not where he wanted to be. And he knew that it was obvious that it was not where he wanted to be. And this is a vulnerability. He couldn't get out. Part of it was sort of the type of life to which he was accustomed. He didn't want to slum it up. Well, when you're not willing to slum it up, you can't move out because you can't get a job that's paying you $25 an hour to live in a house and buy a house and have in a nice neighborhood, etc., etc. So a lot of times, people are vulnerable in that place of transition. And I'm just using the between high school and adulthood because it's an obvious one. And I think everyone knows someone who started recycling themselves in those years. And recycling instead of reinventing. And that is sort of where we're at with these characters. They are recycling themselves and not reinventing themselves. And the longer you are anywhere that you're really not supposed to be, right? And you know you're not supposed to be there, you get angrier. And it's always someone else's fault. And you become you get paranoid. You know, people are always talking about you, aren't they? And how you're the one that never moved out and all this sort of stuff. People adopt an unhealthy type of skepticism. Why would I want to live on my own? That's stupid. That's stupid. You're just losing all your money. You're going to work to waste your time at a 40, at a 9 to 5, and then you throw your money away on your apartment, and you've got nothing at the other end of it. You've got nothing at the end of the day. I've got all of this cool Capri Sun action in the refrigerator that Mom brings home. Things like this. I'm not pointing and laughing at anybody. It's a place to get stuck. A lot of people get stuck in these places. There's also a lot of people get stuck after college. Don't know what to do, don't know where to go. That's where we're at. So when we are conceptualizing these characters, for Volman, he was very obviously, he had just found the love of his life. For Bevins, he had just sort of lost the love of his life. He had not only just lost the love of his life, he was just getting ready to accept himself for who he really was. We don't really understand all that much about the Reverend yet. I'm assuming we will. But further on 118, I want to go back to 118. Because these characters, stuck in their own way, are willing to judge each other for being stuck in their own way. We have this quote from the Reverend about the Bachelors. Having never loved or been loved in that previous place, they were frozen here in a youthful state of perpetual emotional vacuity, interested only in freedom, profligacy, and hijinks, railing against any limitation or commitment whatsoever. And the group of them, Volman, Bevins, and the Reverend, they sort of hate the Bachelors. But why? It's very natural. It happens all the time. This is verisimilitude. This is Saunders flexing on the page, letting us know that it doesn't have to make sense. It's reality. He's putting a mirror up to society and showing us things that actually go on, not caring really if they fit into an overarching narrative thrust. but it's real, you know? So, trying to think, post-high school, we're going to go back to this example. Our story is taking place in that sort of world, in that place of transition where no one's figured it out yet. If they figured it out yet, they wouldn't be in the Bardo. Everyone knows that guy that didn't move out. Everyone knows that guy who maybe he did go to college, but he didn't do his studying. He just did a whole lot of sexing it up. Those guys both judge each other. They might have been best friends 6 months earlier. They're passing judgment on each other now. So that is, to my estimation, what is sort of going on there. But we have here, beyond that, but not beyond that, thematically with that, the introduction of the war with the fallen soldier. I want to read this to you from Lincoln's Melancholy. It happens on page 170. This is right as the South was seceding. Northern eyes turned expectantly to the man in Springfield. Newspapermen who came to see Lincoln noticed the same contrast that had intrigued his friends for decades. Describing the president-elect's careworn appearance, the New York Herald's Henry Villard reported, "The vigor of his mind and the steadiness of his humorous disposition are obviously unimpaired." Samuel R. Weed, a reporter from St. Louis, found Lincoln, quote, "in good spirits," end quote, greeting his supporters with sincere pleasure. There was a sort of sadness in his face, Weed wrote, which was remarked by more than a few of those present, but he kept it under. These glimpses of Lincoln, haggard, vigorous, funny, seeming sad but, quote, keeping it under, hinted at the man's complexity. Lincoln himself offered a telling introduction with a line that he used on allies who had campaigned for him. Quote, "He repeated this remark a half dozen times in 2 hours," end quote, reported Weed. Quote, "and I have no doubt it came direct from his heart." Quote, "Well, boys," Lincoln said, "your troubles are over, but mine have just begun." And now we understand a little bit more about why, perhaps, Abraham Lincoln is the bedrock of this story. Sure, Willie Lincoln seems to be our protagonist. Hans and Bevins and the Reverend are our main characters. But we're here because of Lincoln, aren't we? Everything that we're assuming about this story, the whole world of knowledge that we bring into it, comes from Honest Abe. Abraham Lincoln, whether we really think about it this way or not, is a person that was great with transition. Maybe not the way he handled them, but certainly the fact that he never stopped. There is a story about him when he was in Congress, I believe, and he proposed something that went up like a hot fart in church, and everyone was yelling at him and throwing things. Fights broke out, all this sort of things. He opened a window and walked out. That's how he got out of the situation. He opened a window and, with those long, gangly legs of his, stepped out and just kept walking. Not the most gracious of exits, no. But guess what? He wasn't trapped. He didn't get stuck. I think that is part of what we must take from this, is that Abraham Lincoln is someone who was constantly transitioning. And having been the president when he was the president, he had to be the character that he was, or everything could have fallen apart. And we even have hints Abraham Lincoln was seen as fledgling oftentimes during his presidency. And we had hints in some of the nonfiction, partially apocryphal, true story chapters in the book. I'm not sure what to call them yet. But this leads me to the final point that I have here. We need to be ready. We need to be ready as readers. We have to see this coming. Much is made of the state of death in this book. Volman is running around with his ever ready, ever erection. The Reverend has that look of shock and awe on his face. Bevins is constantly in flummox. He's got 6 arms, remember, and his eyes are always blinking. How is it that Honest Abe will show up? I don't know. I haven't read this book. This is my first time through it, but the way the story is setting up, and this is one of the brilliant things about Saunders, he is willing to beg the question. He's begging the question, how is it that Honest Abe is going to show up? I don't know that he is. I'm saying I would bet you $1,000 he does. No one's taking me up on that. That was simply a matter of speech. I would bet he shows up. But everyone is wearing the sign by which they were killed, or by which they died. Abe having obviously been killed. How was he killed? He was killed with a bullet in his head. If I had to guess, I would be willing to bet that he does not show up with a bullet through his head. I'd be willing to bet that he shows up having died of a broken heart. That when Willie passed, that's the moment Abe really died. I'd be willing that that is going to be some of the commentary being made here. I don't know. But it is definitely going to be interesting and worth watching to understand how this happens. And we have to be watching for hints of what it would take for Willie Lincoln to leave the Bardo, and how it is that Hans and the Reverend and Bevins could learn from that. Because we're in the novel. We understand that that is one of the through lines that's going to happen. But I hope to see you back next time. That is all I've got for this episode. I hope to see you back next week for episode 3 of this series, chapters 43 through 61, pages 145 through 195.